Sometimes, in fandoms, there comes a character over which a lot of hay is made, over whether that character is or is not a good person. Which is a good thing overall. Moral ambiguity in a work is often a sign that the creator wanted the audience to really think about that character, and make judgments about them on their own. But sometimes this discourse becomes very fierce, and there isn't a clear-cut consensus. That's when people start making videos about the subject stating their case on the matter. This is one of those videos. Which brings us to the topic of today's video. A character which has been the topic of much debate in fandom, coming as he does from one of the biggest fandoms, which itself was at its peak popularity when the first big wave of internet fandom was growing up, Severus Snape from Harry Potter. Before we begin, I should establish some criteria for my decision of good or bad. There are a lot of different ways to determine between the two, and I guess I should cover my ass here by stating the obvious, that all morality is subjective. This is just things as I see it. The D&D alignment system considers a good person someone more likely to look out for the interests of others than themselves, and a bad person to be the opposite, with neutral people kind of being about half and half. I'm going to be more generous than that. If someone is more likely to consider only their own well-being than that of someone else, I'm gonna call them bad. And if not, you get to be good for these purposes. So let's look at this video's subject. Snape was born the kid of a muggle, that's a fictional slur for people who aren't wizards, and a witch, that's J.K. Rowling's way of describing female wizards in a way that spells out that in no uncertain terms, they are wholly separate things, even though they learn the exact same magic and do everything the same as wizards. But they're separate. Snape grew up in a place called Spinner's End. With Harry Potter, I can never tell if this is meant to be made-up, silly place name, or is just a real place in England. He grew up poor to a neglectful and abusive pair of parents. His dad was particularly a shit to him, so much like V-Star Stardom would, he grew to hate all muggles just due to their resemblance to him, and romanticized the wizarding world since his time at Hogwarts was relatively pleasant. Snape's first, and possibly only, friend came in the form of a girl his age named Lily Evans, who he met shortly before going to Hogwarts. Though she was from a muggle family, Lily was a witch, and therefore would be going to Hogwarts with Snape. There Snape met the guy who was going to seriously fuck his shit up, James Potter. Now, this isn't James Potter good or bad, but the guy did some real shitty things to Snape, dedicating his life to making the dude's life miserable because Snape made a bad first impression on him, due to having, no social skills whatsoever. And who among us didn't have bad enough social skills at 11 years old to instantly and permanently alienate pretty much everyone we came into contact with? That's normal, right? But Potter and Snape became fierce rivals, despite having a mutual friend in Lily. James was charismatic, had a gang of friends who literally called themselves the Marauders, and kind of won out most, if not all, confrontations with Snape. Eventually, Snape succumbs to the greatest evil a high schooler can face: peer pressure. He joins a bunch of wannabe magic Nazis to feel like he's a big man, and this starts a rift between him and Lily. Eventually, he calls her a mudblood, that's a fictional slur for witches or wizards whose parents are muggles. This is actually treated as a terrible slur within the text, as opposed to muggle, which is just kind of allowed. This severs their ties permanently, and Snape's only friends from then on are a bunch of assholes he doesn't even really like. He of course blames James for this, because he was somewhat involved in the incident, but parallel to Snape, James kinda had been doing a heel-face turn over the same timescale, becoming more than just a shitty bully, and becoming someone Lily would actually want to date, something Snape would never be. So fast forward to graduation, and it's Wizard Nazi time! Pick a side, feisty rebels or shit-heel Death Eaters. Was that name supposed to sound lame? I sure hope so, because it really does betray how crawling in my crawl these guys are trying to be. Lily and her now hubby James pick rebels, despite having a newborn kid to look after, and Snape chooses to serve a dude so comedically sociopathic that he openly kills even his loyal followers for pissing him off. Probably insecurity. Anyhow, due to being a spy and lurking around eavesdropping at an inn, Snape overhears the prophecy about the boy who lived, who will fuck up Wizard Orochimaru and doom all his plans. He snitches this straight away without realizing that this implicates the child of the woman he still has a stalker crush on. Whoops. He begs Lord Mortibutt to spare her, and possibly the husband and kid too, I suppose, if he can, but realizes that his boss is a major league dick, and so goes double agent for his old headmaster Dumbledore. But it's too late! James and Lily get off, and Harry is left in the loving care of his super abusive relatives. So now the Dark Lord is defeated, freedom wins, the Ewoks celebrate, and you lost the girl permanently. Not that you ever had a chance due to, human free will, but don't let that penetrate your little incel mind. And what are you to do? Start abusing children. Snape goes to his old spy master Dumbledore and asks him if he'll teach at this prestigious school. Dumbledore accepts, not because he likes Snape at all, but because he thinks he could be useful in the future. See, Dumbledore has a plan. Dumbledore always has, 5 plans in his back pocket. They may not be good ones, but he sure as fuck has them. He knows that Volo's guide was just fucking around with ghostwriting multiple phylacteries in a move that most wizards would describe as sick as shit, and would be back someday to fuck things up for everyone for no reason yet again, and having someone who was never formally outed as a double agent in his employ, who has a serious mental hang-up on the mother of another super potentially useful pawn against the Dark Lord, is a pretty nice thing to have. So Snape teaches potions at Hogwarts for a decade. I know, he's only in his 30s during the events of the books. Damn you, Alan Rickman, for muddying up my headcanons. During this time, he's in fact super abusive of his students. Really abusive. In his establishing character moment, he not only shows extreme petty favoritism for his own house, of which he is the head, but also tries to intimidate a bunch of 11-year-olds, throwing out a pop quiz on the first day that they have no hope of ever answering correctly, and when someone does, he penalizes her for being a know-it-all. One thing the fanfic Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality does right is point out that he never wanted them to know this shit. He was just trying to flex on them, despite the fact that, again, they are 11, and that being the potions professor, it's just kind of assumed he knows a thing or two more about potions than literal beginners. He bullies one particular student so bad that when a monster that mimics your worst fear jumps out at him, it's Snape's face it takes. And it may sound like I'm getting all bent out of shape over this shit. I know a person taking fictional things too seriously can be a pain, but really, I just get my blood boiling when it comes to the matter of shitty teachers. This is the kids' futures he's fucking with. Imagine how many of them could have been great potions dudes, but they never did because they thought they hated the subject because the guy was a relentless asshole to them the whole time. And potions is inexplicably pretty important to a lot of careers in the wizarding world, so I guess you better steel your nerves and endure great hardships just to get there when you're a child. It's not like I always hate abusive characters, but you better believe I ain't gonna call him a good person. But fuck, story's not over yet, I should hold my damn horses. In fact, story technically hasn't even started yet. Yeah, all that preamble was just getting us up to the events of the books. Don't worry, I won't be going into too much detail, just hitting up the points that inform Snape's morality, since I've laid out his extenuating circumstances pretty well so far. During Harry Potter, the boy who was not actually the subject of this video essay, but is the viewpoint protagonist, so is still going to feature heavily's education, Snape continues to be an abusive jackass, but also secretly helps Harry not die, at least during the first book, and when the magnificent Wiz Hitler inevitably returns, infiltrates his ranks and continues to aid the good guys from within it, while still being a douche to them. But the important part, mostly, is that he doesn't just do bad things, he does in fact do some pretty good ones, so points to the good column, right? Eventually, Snap, Crackle, and Pop has to make the ultimate sacrifice, killing the one person still living he really gives a shit about. Spoilers, Snape kills Dumbledore, and spoilers even further than that, he kills him for the reason of needing to avoid some serious magical artifacty mojo falling into Voldio Guilt's possession. He then takes over as headmaster of Hogwarts, because over the school break, shit goes to hell in a handbasket, and the Death Eaters secretly take over the entire Wizarding World's government. Well, okay, only Britain's, which the books treat as basically being the entire world anyhow. It's a change to see this happen in a non-American franchise for once. I learned it from you, Dad. I learned it from watching you. Snape uses his power to fuck things up royally, allowing open prejudice against mudbloods and all sorts of other nasty shit to happen under his watch. But you may think this is yet another paragraph of the script where I tear into the fellow, but he's honestly delivering a softer blow than anyone else allowed to be put in the position would have, and needs to at least be keeping up the pretext of being a racist scumbag to not blow his heavy cover of being a big fucking turncoat against the baddies. So as shit as this is, I don't think any of his actions as headmaster really count against him, because he did it for good reasons and in effect made things better for the people of Hogwarts than it otherwise would have been. In the end, the Voldemort ends up turning on Snape and killing him for that aforementioned artifact. Snape kills the snake that was meant to kill the Snape, but not before being fatally poisoned himself. I just now realize how ironic it is that a guy that dedicated his life to potions ends up dying of poison. Didn't think to bring an antidote to that stuff with you? And in his dying moments tells Harry that he always had the hots for his mum, and that he did it all for Harry, which is to say, he did it all for Harry's mum. And that's the end of Severus Snape's story. He did some shitty things, but he also did some heroic things, and ended up redeeming himself due to love. Right? I mean, that's what the story's telling you. Harry even ends up naming one of his incredibly poorly named even for the series children after him. It's what a lot of people seem to believe. But the whole point of making this essay was to tell you that morality doesn't work that way. You see, we as people are pretty interconnected. There's pretty much nobody who doesn't care about anybody else. Snape cares about two people in his life, Dumbledore and Lily. Actually an unrealistically low amount, but it's a work of fiction and we can accept some breaks from reality for clarity's sake. You know that thing I said before about people doing things in their own interest as opposed to others? Well, you can still do that and love someone. At that point, the loved one kind of becomes an exception to the rule, that you don't care about anybody else except that person. Anyone you don't personally have an attachment to you can fuck right off. And this is how Snape acts. He's needlessly cruel to anyone he can get away with being, and never does anyone for anyone he doesn't have to. Except Dumbledore and Lily, both because they were personally kind to him. Turning against Voldemort was only something Snape did because he was mad Voldemort wanted to kill the person he loved. Anyone else? Fuck him. Who cares? He goes through with Dumbledore's plan because it might save Harry, who he's somewhat using as a proxy for his lost love, and also because Dumbledore himself gave him a job when no one else would, and honestly with good cause, he's a fucking Nazi, and let him abuse children to his heart's content for a decade or so, when any caring headmaster would have fired his ass. So, in conclusion, Snape was an abuse survivor who could have leaned into the one person who cared about him in the world as a child, but instead got embittered that she didn't want to date him and became part of a hate group instead. He only left that hate group because they wanted to kill the married woman he still creepily crushed on, and then replicated the abuse he experienced as a kid by bullying children for decades, before working against his former hate group undercover to help save the life of the last physical remnants of the woman that he was still creepily crushing on. He was a dude who did a lot of good, but only so far as it helped the people he really cared about, and was otherwise a complete scumbag. So I can say with total finality, Severus Snape bad. Alright, that's sorted then. I expect we can see no more debate of this contentious topic ever again. Certainly not in the comments section.